guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we're working on the drift sled. Last time you saw it was down in South Australia, slaying walls. And today, we're going to talk a bit about what it takes to maintain this beast. As I'm sure you know, drifting takes a massive toll on these cars, and we do send the absolute hell out of them. I've had this beast for about 5 years now, and they have not been easy years on the go. 2024 was no exception. If anything, it was probably the hardest year on the go. It's Boxing Day here in Melbourne, and it is going to be a scorcher at 42 degrees today. So I'm going to be trying my best to smash out everything that I can on this car today before it gets too hot. It's already 28 degrees and it's only 8 AM now. Let's get into it. Now if you're anything like me, you've got multiple cars and maintaining all those becomes a mission. So I am lucky enough to have some legendary guys helping out with this car. Raceworks have been on board with us since the LZ World Tour, and they have sent us out a massive box full of goodies to get this car and a couple other projects underway. I started having issues with some intercooler couplers this year, so they've sent out a whole bunch of their silicone joiners so we can replace all of those, and we'll be able to use the other ones as spares. Most importantly for today, this car does not run at the moment because I had to steal the oil line off of it for my Drift K70, which you'll see in another video probably after this. We've got to get a new line made up for this car now, so they've sent us out some of their 200 series braided line and a whole bunch of the Dash 4 fittings to suit. This time we're going the extra step and taking the precaution of heat sleeving everything, which I should have done the first time and didn't. So we're gonna get that oil line done, and at the same time I am going to change all the wastegate lines. So all my braided wastegate lines have got some heat damage on them as well. So I'm gonna take the time while I'm doing this to change those as well and heat sleeve them. And hopefully that'll keep us going for another few years because they've lasted quite well as they were. There's also a few more goodies in that, but that's for another project at another time. And you might have spotted what we got here. Not only did I rub the oil line off this for the K70, but I actually rubbed the rear discs off this car. Thanks to the absolute dead set legends down at Burson's Auto Parts in Ferntree Gully. They've hooked us up with these Brembo discs. If you're anywhere in the southeast, I highly recommend you hit them up for parts. The guys down there are car guys, and above all else, they actually know what they're talking about, unlike some stores. I love throwing them some curveballs and ringing them up, telling you, I've got a K70 with a Skyline diff, with Commodore brakes, with fucking, you name it, it's got it. Those guys are down to sort it out. So thank you, Brett and the team down there at Burson's Ferntree Gully. I'm super happy to have your support, and thank you, Raceworks. Let's get into it. First up, so we can feel like we're smashing out some progress, let's get the rear discs on because that's nice and quick. Looks way too clean to go on the rest of this stuff. Now we've got internal drum handbrake because this is an R33 rear brake setup. So what we're going to have to do first is adjust the handbrake. I like to do this before I bolt the calipers on. We'll just grab 2 wheel nuts. Buzz them up so that the disc is located properly. Grab your pry bar. There should be no drag on it to start with. Now there's this little inspection hole here, and what we're going to do is we've got our screwdriver and there's a little gear that winds out the actual drum assembly until it touches the disc. Basically what you want to get it to the point is where that just starts to drag and then back it off a click. Pretty simple, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a pain to get in there. So that's got some drag to it now. We'll just back that off one hair, one click. Perfect. Now time to slap our calipers on. One thing I was hoping to do when I put this car back together was change all my bolts, because as annoying as it is, I have a whole bunch of different headed bolts on this car, particularly for the rear brakes. Unfortunately, there's no bolt shops around here that are open till the new year. So for now, these ones are coming back in. And I say I'll change it out in the future, but you know, once they're in there, it's highly unlikely they're coming in. Because I've got a welded diff in this car and they don't spin independently, I've got to do both sides of that adjustment before we throw the calipers on. So I'll go do that and then we'll jump back across. Now, as you might expect, a drift car doesn't really wear through its pads or discs anywhere near as fast as a street or a circuit car would. For example, I've had the same pads in this car since it was built about 5 years ago, which were some Project Mu pads for the handbrake and some EBC red stuff pads for the front. They've worked a treat, and they literally are the same pads I put in that car when I built it. They are now about due for replacement, so next year we are going to have to look at that. But that is 5 years of use. And you know what the funny thing is? Most amount of wear that happened on those pads was from the 2 circuit days that we did. I reckon if we didn't do those, we still probably would have had a year or 2 left on those pads quite easily. Drift cars cop a lot of wear and tear, but the brakes aren't really one of them. Also probably noticed we've got dual caliper setup, because we are running the Driftworks rear knuckles with the dual caliper mount, 2 R33 GTST calipers. I got Project Mu ones in the handbrake and just normal Bendix in for the foot brake. Don't really find that you need a hell of a lot better. I would like to put some better pads in it, I just could never justify the cost. When I go circuit racing, the D1 pads come out of the handbrake and go in for the foot brake. So we swap that straight across from caliper to caliper, which is nice and simple on these, as it's literally a 2-pin slide system. Nice and simple. That's our first job out of the way, so let's get cracking into more depth. Before we bring her down and get working on that oil line and a few other pieces, let's go up in the air so I can show you the real nitty gritty, the stuff that no one actually wants to show you. Where your drift car is really going to wear out, especially if it's as low as mine. Now, a lot of the bits that I'm going to show you that are worn out of my car wouldn't be the case if the car was a lot higher. So some of you guys might not have these problems, but I know a lot of you are probably like me and you just rail the car for no other reason than it looks fat as hell. US 14, 15 guys won't have this problem, but S13s have the steel tank out the back. So this thing has copped an absolute hiding. It's not leaking though, so we're not going to be doing anything about that. Everything under here probably looks a lot worse than it actually is because it is filthy at the moment. I am in dire need of getting this car outside, up on jack stands and pressure washing under here. So we'll have to get to that soon once it gets off the hoist. But as you can see, she is caked in dirt and you name it. I have got a bit of an oil leak in the diff. This seems to be a pretty common occurrence for me. I am planning on doing some stuff for the subframe. I actually really want to raise the diff. I don't know how difficult that's going to be. Probably a pain in the ass. But I'd love to figure out a way to do it that is relatively simple and will brace the subframe at the same time as that. Low car life means don't expect to ever have a boot last on your car, ever. So I changed all the boots on these and they pretty much immediately do weird things like twist, catch, spin. These are actually the better ones because these axles only went in recently. The other ones I've had in the car were in the car for about 2 years and they didn't have boots on them, no grease at all. I really should find those axles, they're upstairs somewhere. I actually broke the cage out of it, so there was only like 4 out of the 6 balls like holding in the actual CV. And we're still doing backies on those axles. They were like the gifted axles. How I got through what I did with those, I'll never know. These are 350Z axles, which we've got in the cut to shut adapter flange here by Grubby from 21 Fab. To get us a little beefier axle, about as strong as a 5-bolt, but much easier to come by these days, and a good CV. I was only running the stock 6-bolt NA axles to begin with. More evidence of low car life. Dragon sway bar links. Of course, dragged the exhaust that many times. This is like the 2nd time now it's been plated, and I have now worn through this one as well. In SA, we came off track and actually managed to grab something. I'm not sure exactly what, but it ripped this cross member out of the mounts there. And we basically cross-threaded in different threaded bolts into the car. So it is mounted and definitely secure at the moment. But I want to take those out, get 4 new bolts, helicoil all 4, so we've got some nice matching threads again, and get that sorted. And here's the worst bit of my car right now, and the bit I'm not looking forward to, and it's definitely not getting done today. We are leaking oil quite badly. This motor went a long time without leaking a single drop, and then about 3 events ago it started weeping. I actually thought it was the rear main seal, and before SA we pulled the box on this thing to do the rear main seal, only to work out it's actually the lower pan right near the rear. So basically up in that gap around there is where it's actually leaking and then coming down here. The problem with that is I've got to pull the subframe off as well as the gearbox because there's 2 annoying nuts up the top there to get this whole lower pan off. So quite a big job. It'll be a good opportunity to give everything nice clean. It's well deserved. Our aero cut bash plate has been working a treat. So as you can see, this thing has copped a hammering, particularly in SA, with a fair few board slides and everything. There's a lot of drop-offs at the bend and this thing is railed. Still, one of my favorite things about the bash plate is that they actually do different cutouts of different sumps. So this is specifically for the Greddy style sump, so I have no issue changing oil without removing this. A lot of the other ones you do, so that's real handy. Everything in the front suspension is holding up pretty damn good. Probably just needs a good washover. The rails and sills on this car are actually surprisingly good for what this car is. Compared to most of the drift cars that I get here, they're obviously little bits of dents up in places, but I see plenty of street cars come through the shop here and 90% of them are worse than this thing. I'm still very happy overall with how this car is holding up to the abuse we're giving it, but I'm very happy that we're putting the time in to get it reliable to make sure we don't have any issues in future. Like I said before, we've got a few lines of chains over with the new Raceworks stuff, and on top of that, we've got a few other bits and pieces. This motor was forged about 2 years ago, and one thing that I always maintain with at least SR20s, and that's the main thing that I've ever worked on, is despite what the instructions say, always re-torque the head studs twice. By which I mean, torque them once, drive the car, whether it's an event, dyno, whatever, and re-torque them again. Every single time I've done this, I've gotten noticeable amounts out of the studs, and I've spoken to a few engine builders and they do agree with me. Originally, when I just did head studs and head gasket, I remember to pull them back about and do them twice. Annoyingly with SRs, you have to pull the cams out, which makes it a much bigger job than some motors. When this motor came out again and I actually put forged rods into the car, re-torqued those twice after the dyno session as well. For whatever reason, it's just been that way that since I've full forged the motor and now it's got 10-to-1 pistons and all the rest of it, I never went to the extra effort of pulling the cams back out and re-torquing them. It's been 2 years and it has held up, although we have been getting a little bit hot lately at events. I don't believe it's lifting ahead. So today I want to get that out of the way so it stops playing on my mind. On top of that, we've gone and got a Tomei adjustable cam gear. Brand newy. I've actually got one in the intake side already. I did have two in the past, but one of them was a generic Chinese copy of a Tomei one, and it actually wore out where the dowel pin was. I wasn't confident using that one, so I went back to a stock gear. One of the things I've always been curious with, but never actually had the time on the dyno or someone willing to do, is mess around with the cam timing. I'd love to have degreed this in properly when I built the motor when it was on a stand, but I didn't. As usual with this car, I built that motor in like 2 nights and it was at the track another 2 nights after that. So really didn't have time to sit it around there and get around to finding all the pieces I needed to degree it properly. And it seemed like a pretty tedious job. Now we get to do it in an even harder way, which is gonna be in the car. I do love my SRs, but one thing that does suck about them is it doesn't have a separate cam gear. It is all within the valve cover. So we're going to the dyno and we're gonna be doing it by dyno results. It means every single time you make an adjustment, that valve cover is coming off, an adjustment's made, valve cover back on, coil packs back in, another run. So I'll be curious to see what sort of results we can get out of it, but the main thing I want to do this for is I'm aiming to get a bit more response in the car. The car's got 10-to-1 compression pistons and it's running a Pulsar G25 550, so it's a small frame turbo. We don't have overly big cams in it. It's got 260, 266 calipers. We comp tested at 195 PSI on all 4 cylinders and passed the leak down test with flying colors. So we know there's no internal issues with our motor. Hey Coops. And we're gonna try and see if it's an airflow issue. And this car doesn't make full boost to 4,000 RPM. One of the reasons our cam timing part might be quite a way out is this head has been decked numerous times. I would have to say at least 4 or 5 times and potentially more. And the block's been decked once as well. Every time those surfaces are decked, essentially the head and block get closer and closer together, which obviously your timing chain's not getting any shorter. So it actually rotates over a little bit and ends out of time from where it originally was. If you're curious, even on stock cams, it was 4,000 RPM for this thing to come on to full boost. Full boost on this car is about 26, 27 pound boost. I'm actually hoping with some effort on the dyno and getting the car a little bit more responsive and efficient, I actually want to lower the boost a little bit to make the car a little bit safer. Not that I've had any dramas at the moment, but I believe we are overspinning the turbo a little bit. Between 26, 28 pound on this sort of turbo is definitely getting up there. So I'd love to see if we can get the boost to come in more around 3,500 RPM, even if you have to sacrifice a little bit up in the top. I'd much prefer the response than the top end power. That's enough talking. Let's get into some work. If you've got any kind of S chassis and you haven't done the hinge one to get your bonnet to stand up, then what are you doing? Because life is 10,000 times easier like that. At the track, it'll probably try and blow itself away, but when you're working in the workshop, God does it make life easy. I hate seeing her look this disgusting, so I'm very keen to get this back out there and washed and pretty again. We've got a lot of body work to do in the back end as well, as you may have seen from the last event.
In this second battle, but you know he's not got it. He's going to push him at Marcus McCarthy up in the wall.
So oil line is nice and simple. We've got a fitting off the block just down there. It'll come up and go to our fitting right here, which is nice and accessible. One thing I love about these third strike manifolds, this is the long runner version, and it actually does bring the turbo out and further forward, making it 10 times easier to work on everything, and even gives you a lot more room for dump pipe and everything. So really, really nice to work on. The other lines I was talking about changing are these. These ones have some more noticeable heat damage. These are our vacuum lines to the wastegate, our Turbo Spark 50mm. As you can see, these were the black braid. All the black braid has melted off. So she has been getting red hot. So we're going to be changing these two sections here, and obviously it always pissed me off that I have two different fittings here. It always bugged me. When I did this car, they didn't have stock of all the same stuff. So now we'll have matching lines and fittings. We'll also get some heat sleeving on that to hope that this doesn't happen in future. We've got all our Raceworks bits lined up here now. So we've got the soft jaws for making the lines, got our AN spanners, we've got 2 meters of their 200 series hose and a whole bunch of 90s straights and the heat sleeving. Today we're just going to do the oil line to get the car mobile and good for the dyno. For that I'm going to need 2 90s, some line and heat sleeving. So first up, we're going to attach one end of line together so we can bolt this into the block and then run it out to our fitting on top of the turbo and then cut it to the exact length. I don't know how these work. You'll see it right up close. There's these little olive pieces. Whoop. This piece will go over the line first, and then if you see inside that, you'll see the Teflon liner. This is what's called your olive. Hopefully that's in focus. And basically that presses in between this gap and opens up. And then when you tighten it into the actual fitting, it crushes everything all together and you've got a nice sealed line rated for plenty of pressure. So while there's still tape on that it comes with, I'm going to try and shove this over. The problem you'll have with these lines is they like to open back up and basically fray material. So we'll slide that over like so. Grab our olive, open up the edge of the line. When you start making lines, you'll probably make the mistake most of us make and at some point forget to put this piece over first and it'll catch you out and you'll have to recut the line. So try and remember not to do that. Hopefully that's the ticket. Sweet, so that's over there. Just give it a push up against the bench or the vise. Get it seated all the way. You'll be able to see the Teflon liner comes. You'll be able to see the Teflon liner comes right up to under the olive. Like so. And then we'll pop it in the vise here. Having the right tools really pays off. Grab a nice Raceworks dashboard spanner. And the important thing here is just to keep a little bit of pressure on the line because you don't want the line to be able to back out. The general rule of thumb with most fittings is about a 1mm gap there. Some lines that will be slightly different, but on ours that's perfect. So I'm going to go bang that in the car. We'll measure out where our lengths need to be and I'm going to put a cable tie on the line where we need to cut it. A lot of people have some different methods and there are some really nice cutters that are usually pretty expensive that cut these things nicely. I've always found an angle grinder with a cable tie that works a treat to cut right next to the cable tie and it stops everything fraying open. It makes life nice and easy with minimal mess. Obviously once you're done you want to grab some compressed air and blow through the line before installing on the car. I ended up realising to be safe I better put the shooting on first before putting that cable tie because it's probably not going to go over the cable tie and once I cut it and take the cable tie off it may fray open and not be able to get this on it. So good and done that, we'll replay our cable tie and cut. Now we can grab our other fitting again. So I just went and put a little bit of electrical tape back on that. So we should be able to get this over now. Hopefully. Yep. Now we can pull the tape up, let it come apart. Olive back on. Now these can swivel, you'll have to put a spanner on it once they're tight to be able to turn them, but they can still swivel. So we'll try and get it as close as we can. And there's one nice oil line, all sleeved, ready to go. Now you're probably not going to be able to see me get it all in there, so I'll pop it in and then I'll show you how she runs. Hopefully you can see in there nicely, but the line is running right in the middle of those first two runners with the heat sleeving. There's plenty of clearance on everything. It's actually much better than it was before. So yeah, happy days. It's not going to want to wiggle either way. Happy days. Like I said, we'll get to those other lines another day. So for my own peace of mind and to make sure that oil line doesn't leak, we're going to start it up first before we pull the rocker cover off and get cracking in there. Oh, I made a mess, guys. Whoops. Brought the hoist down on my old oil bottle and yeah, now I have an even bigger mess to clean up. Yay! Yo! It's a lumpy girl. Always the way on cars, you start working on one thing and you find another problem. When I was just running the car there, I actually found that I had a fuel leak coming from one of the clamps on my fuel line before the filter. So, lucky we spotted that when we did. I don't know how long that's been going or whether that's just happened while it's sitting around, but I was able to get a fair bit more out of the clamp on all of them really. And yeah, that's all sealed up luckily. It wasn't actually a split hose. So a fuel leak is just about the worst thing you could leak. So glad we got that sorted. I've just run into a problem which I do run into quite regularly, so I thought I'd give you some tips for it. If you've got these dress-up bolts, these are the ones from Tarks, these little Allen key head bolts strip out very, very easily. Well, they're round enough that the socket doesn't want to work. This obviously works for any kind of bolt like this. Grab a punch and literally tap around the edge. It folds everything back across to make it a hex again. And then to make your life easier, as we've taken some pressure off of this side, that bolt's going to have more on it, so we'll at least wind one of these back in. So hopefully that bolt won't be under quite as much tension. So see, it's folded over, it's so tight that the actual socket won't go back in it. So line that back up to a hex. So as tight a fit as it's going to get. Push down. Bloody beautiful. So, hope that tip saves some of you, because it's definitely saved me a few times. Now we can go back to our electric ratchet. Despite everything being disgustingly filthy on the engine bay, the engine is of course perfect. E85 helps, and that lovely blue Smurf Blood Martini racing oil in there. As you can see, we've got a Tarks trigger kit on here, so to get the cams out we will have to unwind our hall sensor to make sure we don't damage that. I also thought I had my adjustable gear on the intake side, but it's actually on the exhaust. I'm pretty sure I did that because I knew it was going to be a pain later to swap the Hall effect wheel over and everything, so it was going to be much easier just to do the wheel on the one side. So anyway, and yeah, basically our head start bolts are down in there, so very annoying to get to, so that is why the cams have to come out. First up, let's go mode it to TDC. Just a 27mm socket on the crank pulley. Hella good compression in this thing. Yeah, we crank some motors, they turn over pretty easy. Not this thing. Let's loosen off the intake cam gear, knowing we're going to have to swap that pulley. Alright, cams are out, we're ready to torque our head studs. Go 1/2 inch 12-sided socket, down the gullies there. As you can see, the cam sits right in place where the head stud holes are, so no chance of getting those without removing them. Anyway, there's a specific sequence to do, so I'll look that up and we will do it in the same factory sequence. When you're doing these up for the first time, you do them in stages. I believe the torque setting was 90 Newton meters and we do 30, 60, 90. Because obviously this has been torqued up to 90 before, or 95 or whatever it was. We're just gonna go straight for that final setting again just to check everything's up where it needs to be. And I'll be curious and whether you guys will see just how far we get them to turn. All right, first one. A little bit. Fair bit out of that one. That's scary. So as you can see, we actually did get a bit out of some of them. Some of them clicked straight up and others actually turned as much as probably about that, which is a fair amount. So worth checking. I should have done it when I put the cams in earlier in the year and I did tell myself to do it and I completely forgot. So anyway, peace of mind now. I've had other times where I've got even more out of them than what I did then after the second talking. So it is definitely worthwhile to do. Now we're gonna do a bit of YouTube magic and this thing's gonna be back together in no time. And just like that, she's all back together. So we've got our adjustable cam gear in there, all tight, everything's all timed, the tension is back in and released, and we've done a couple of rotations and rechecked and everything is all perfect. So it is time to smash the rocker cover back on. I'm only gonna try and put the center bolts in the rocker cover and hope it doesn't leak too bad because we're gonna have to mess with the cam timing on the dyno. I don't want to be taking every single one of those out every single time. I did end up having to do a little bit of extra work when I was pulling everything apart. I found just a really light scoring on one of the cams, and so we had to look a little bit further and found that our rockers, I'm not sure if you can see that line, it looks more obvious than it feels, but you can just feel it with your nail on two of the rockers, so they're just starting to wear out, little flats. I've seen a lot worse than that, but took the time to swap those out. I had some spares. I run dual rocker guides in this, which did mean I just have to repeat what I've done here, which is shave the end of the rocker so it sits inside that guide. So we've done that to two more new rockers and they are all slapped in. Gave the cam a little bit of micro polishing with a 1200 grit sandpaper just to get the little roughness off of it and it come up good. So I don't think we'll have any issues, but preventative maintenance, I do check those every single time the cams come out of this. Rockers are definitely a wear out item in an SR, particularly when you've got cams and big valve springs. Stock cams, honestly, I barely ever had any wear in it, but I can see now that the cams are definitely adding a little bit to it because that was about 4 events, I think, or 5 events this is done with these cams in it. Anyway, we'll get the rocker cover back on and then we'll make sure she fires back up. Well, as you can hear, that didn't go to plan. For some reason it's on 3 cylinders and unplugging the injectors I was able to work out that cylinder 3 is basically not doing anything. So I'm going to check over, I'm just going to swap the coil packs from 2 to 3, see if that moves the problem. I've had this issue sometimes before when I've taken everything apart and put it back together, so I don't know if it's a connection issue or something within one of the wiring. So maybe I'll just unplug and plug them back in. Anyway, give me a minute, we'll come back. As you can see, she's back on 4 cylinders and God, she sounds good. Didn't have to replace anything, just unplugging and plugging shit back in seemed to make it work. So maybe the coil pack wasn't quite all the way onto the plug for some reason. So I popped them out, pushed them back in. Seems all good. Happy days. Good boy. Cooper's been chilling out with me, getting shit done. It is stupid hot and I am wrecked already, so we're gonna wrap that up here. I believe this will be 2 parts because we're gonna carry on at the dyno from now on. I obviously have some panel damage to repair, which isn't too bad from SA. We'll just get the quarter power in here. I've got a new bumper bar and a new tail light. Give it a quick old wipe down and she should be good. Got my nightmarish oil spill to clean up as well. And as I said before, I do have to eventually do that sump that's leaking quite badly. Not looking forward to it. But anyway, we made some progress, got some shit done today. So I'm happy with that. Big yawns, Cooper's ready to go. Big stretches. You might be wondering too, what am I getting the S13 ready for? Well, in 4 weeks, or less than 4 weeks now, on Australia Day, the 25th of January, we are putting on one of the biggest events we're gonna see in Australia. I think it's gonna be the closest thing we would have seen since the Adam LZ World Tour to being that big. So, keen for that. Now they haven't, it's 4 weeks out and we still don't actually know who's driving yet. I know that we're probably not going to be part of the top 16. There's an invitational with like Chelsea Denofa and a whole bunch of people coming over. And they're going to have a ride on track in comp, but apparently there are spots for some Australians from different states, but again, not released yet. So we're getting everything ready on a whim and hoping that we get that invite because I want to shred the hell out of this thing, and if we're lucky enough, we'll get to drive with some of those guys coming out, because that's a dream for me to drive with the best in the world. So we're gonna have fingers crossed. We're doing this on a whim, on the hope that we actually get invited, so I really hope we do. At the end of the day, it doesn't hurt to have the S13 ready to go, but I am super keen for that event, and I hope we get to put on a show. And even better would be if we get to drive with some of those guys coming out. They're all guys I look up to, and I want to push my driving to the absolute limit, and what better way to do that than to test it with some of the best in the world. Anyway, cheers for hanging out. I'll see you guys in the next video.
Look at Marcus McCarthy up on the walls, grinding the walls through turn one. Matt Harvey right there in the pocket as they transition now into the sweeper. Matt Harvey trying to close that gap, trying to assert that dominance on the side of Marcus McCarthy, who's got the back bumper flapping as they come through the final corner.